She was 23 years old. She drove a dented brown Datsun, worked the early shift at a lumber yard office in Coos County, and every Friday evening she brought home a rotisserie chicken from the grocery on Marlow Road and ate it at the kitchen table with her sister. Her name was Carol Dean Whitfield. And on the evening of October 17, 1980, she left that grocery store, climbed into her car, and was never seen alive again. That is not a story about a woman who made a wrong turn. That is a story about a man who had been watching her for months, who knew her schedule, knew her route, and who believed, for 44 years, that he had gotten away with it. And he nearly had. It would take 4.5 decades, the retirement of 3 different sheriffs, and a forensic technology that did not exist when Carol was alive to finally reach into that cold, quiet darkness and pull out a name. A name that everyone in Coos County recognized. A name attached to a face they had seen at school board meetings and church potlucks and the 4th of July parade. When the arrest came, people in that community said they felt the ground shift beneath them. This is the story of Carol Whitfield. And this is the story of how the truth, no matter how long it waits, eventually finds its way home. To understand what was lost, you have to understand what Coos Bay, Oregon was in October of 1980. It was a timber town, a working town, the kind of place where mill whistles still set the rhythm of the day, where men drove pickups with gun racks in the back window, and where neighbors left their doors unlocked not out of naivety, but out of a genuine understanding that they were all in this together. The coast was 30 minutes west, gray and constant, and the smell of Douglas fir and salt air ran through everything, through the diners on Central Avenue, through the school gymnasium on Friday nights, through the fabric of the town itself. Ronald Reagan had just been elected. The St. Helens ash had settled. The price of lumber was beginning its slow, painful fall that would hollow out towns like Coos Bay for the next decade, though nobody knew that yet. The VH tape player at the rental place on 4th Street had a 6-person wait list. The local paper ran high school football scores on the front page. Carol Whitfield had grown up in that town. She had graduated from Marshfield High School in 1975, spent 2 years taking classes at the community college, and landed a position at the front office of the Cascadia Timber Supply Yard in 1978. She was good at her job, careful with numbers, the kind of person who remembered everyone's name and noted in a small leather planner when their birthdays were coming up. Her sister Diane was 21 and worked the overnight shift at the truck stop on Highway 101. They rented a small green house together on Elrod Avenue, 40 years old if it was a day, with a front porch that tilted slightly toward the street. They had a cat named Mop. They watched Dallas on Friday nights when Carol got home from the grocery run. People who knew Carol described her the same way across all these years. Steady, that was the word that came back. Steady and warm. The kind of person who didn't make a fuss, but who quietly kept everything around her from falling apart. She had been saving money to visit her cousin in Seattle. She had a trip planned for December. She had circled the dates in that leather planner in red ink. She left the Marlow Road grocery store at 6:47 p.m. On Friday, October 17, 1980, the store manager remembered her because she asked about a sale on cranberry sauce, and he told her it started the following week. She was smiling when she walked out the door. That was the last time anyone who loved her saw her whole. Diane got home from work at 7:15 that morning to find the house dark, the front door unlocked, and the rotisserie chicken still in its grocery bag on the counter. She thought Carol had fallen asleep early. She put the chicken in the refrigerator and went to bed. By 10 a.m., She knocked on Carol's bedroom door. No answer. The bed was made. The leather planner was open on the nightstand, the December dates circled in red. Diane drove to the grocery store on Marlow Road. The manager confirmed Carol had left the night before. She drove to the lumber yard. Closed, she drove every road she could think of between the store and Elrod Avenue, 3 times, until her hands were shaking on the steering wheel. At 11:43 a.m., she walked into the Coos County Sheriff's Office. The deputy on duty told her that adults had the right to leave. He told her Carol had probably gone somewhere for the weekend. He told Diane to go home and wait. She went home. She did not sleep. By Saturday evening, with Carol still unreachable, the sheriff's office opened a missing persons report. A search was organized for the following morning. Neighbors gathered. Members of Carol's church drove the logging roads east of town. At 9:20 a.m. on Sunday, October 19th, Carol's brown Datsun was found pulled to the shoulder of Beaver Hill Road, a 2-lane stretch of rural highway 5 miles southeast of town. The engine was off. The keys were in the ignition. Her purse was on the passenger seat. Her coat was folded on the back seat, as though she had set it down carefully and meant to return to it. The driver's door was unlocked. There was no sign of a struggle, no blood, no broken glass. There was a single smear on the outside of the driver's door, a partial handprint, low, near the door handle. It was photographed and preserved. Carol herself was not there. A search of the surrounding timberland and creek beds ran for 5 days. Cadaver dogs. Volunteers from 3 counties. Aircraft from the state police. They did not find her. 3 weeks later, a hiker on a trail near the South Fork of the Coos River found a canvas shoe. Size 7. It matched a pair that Diane confirmed Carol owned. That shoe was logged into evidence. The handprint on the Datsun was lifted onto a card and sent to the Oregon State Police Crime Lab. Neither piece of evidence, not the shoe, not the print, produced an identification. Carol Dean Whitfield had walked out of a grocery store, driven 5 miles, and then, by every available measure, simply ceased to exist. 44 years would pass before anyone understood what had actually happened on that road. The lead investigator assigned to the case was a Coos County detective named Russell Helens. He was 38 years old, a former Marine, and he had been with the sheriff's office for 11 years. He was methodical, patient. His colleagues said he was the kind of man who slept 4 hours a night on an active case. Not from anxiety, but from something closer to moral obligation. Haynes had 2 early suspects. The first was a former boyfriend, a man named Gary Pullman, who had dated Carol briefly in 1979, and who, by several accounts, had not taken the end of that relationship well. Pullman was interviewed 3 times in October and November of 1980. His alibi for the evening of October 17th was documented and confirmed by 2 witnesses. He had been at a card game in Bandon, 50 miles south. Investigators believed the alibi. Pullman was eliminated. The second was a co-worker from the lumber yard, a man who had made comments to other employees that were described as, in the language of the case file, inappropriate in nature. He was interviewed twice. He consented to a polygraph. He passed it. He, too, was eliminated. By December, the case had no viable suspects and no body. The Oregon State Police Missing Persons Unit took a secondary look at the file in January of 1981. They noted that the partial handprint on the Datsun was too incomplete for a reliable identification with the technology available at the time. They noted that the shoe found near the river was consistent with the terrain, suggesting Carol had been in that area. They noted that the absence of a body made a homicide charge legally difficult to pursue, even with a clear suspect. There was no clear suspect. Helens continued working the case through 1982. He canvassed Beaver Hill Road a second time, interviewed 17 additional people who lived or worked along that stretch of highway, and followed up on 3 tips called into the office. None of them led anywhere. What he did not know, what no one in that office knew, was that the man they were looking for had been to several of those same neighbor interviews, had answered the door, offered coffee in some cases, and watched the detective drive away from his property without a second glance. He was hiding, in the most effective way a person can hide, in plain sight, inside the ordinary life of a small community that trusted him completely. Meanwhile, Diane Whitfield had moved out of the green house on Elrod Avenue. She could not stay there. She moved to a studio apartment near the coast and called Detective Helens every month, sometimes more. She kept the leather planner. She kept the red-circled December dates as though they represented something that might still, somehow, be restored. The community held a memorial service for Carol in the spring of 1981. People came. They brought flowers. They talked about how steady she had been. By summer, most of them had moved on. Diane never did. The years have a way of burying things. By 1985, 5 years had passed. Detective Helens had been promoted to lieutenant. The partial handprint from the Datsun had been re-examined once, in 1983, and again found to be insufficient for identification. The shoe from the river sat in an evidence box on a shelf in a climate-controlled storage room at the county building on Anderson Avenue. The brown Datsun had been released to Diane, who eventually sold it. She said she couldn't look at it. By 1990, 10 years. The house on Elrod Avenue had been sold twice, then converted into a rental. A family with 3 children lived there. They had no idea what the greenhouse had once meant to 2 sisters and a cat named Mop. Helens retired in 1994. Before he left the department, he walked to the evidence room and stood in front of Carol Whitfield's box for a long time. He told a colleague later that he said something out loud to the empty room. He didn't say what. He took a copy of the case file home and kept it in his garage, in a cardboard box beside his fishing gear. He reviewed it every few years. Every time, he came to the same place, a man he couldn't identify, a print he couldn't read, and a woman he couldn't find. By 2000, 2 more sheriffs had held the office. Neither had assigned active resources to the case. Cold case units were not yet standard in counties the size of Coos. The file existed. It simply sat. Diane had remarried by then. She lived in Medford, 3 hours south. She still called the sheriff's office every year on October 17th. The calls were logged. Over time, a new generation of deputies answered the phone and had to pull up records to understand who she was asking about. She kept calling anyway. "I just want somebody to know we haven't forgotten her," she told a local reporter in 2003, in a small piece that ran in the Coos Bay World on the 23rd anniversary of Carol's disappearance. "She wasn't a case number. She was my sister." The reward poster in the front window of the Marlow Road grocery store had long since faded to nothing. Nobody could remember exactly when it had been taken down. Every case on this channel represents weeks of research, verifying facts, and piecing together lives that deserve better. If you want us to keep uncovering the truth behind stories like this one, please take a second to like this video and subscribe. Drop a comment below telling us where in the world you're watching from. Your support is what makes this work possible. Now, let's get back to Carol. The case had been cold for 43 years when a single request changed everything. In the spring of 2023, the Coos County Sheriff's Office received a grant from the Oregon Department of Justice to fund a cold case review unit, one of 14 such units established across the state in the wake of a legislative push to address unsolved homicides dating back to the 1970s. The case of Carol Dean Whitfield was among the first 12 files pulled for review. The detective assigned to that unit was a woman named Sergeant Patricia Voss. She was 44 years old, had spent 12 years in forensic investigation, and had worked 2 prior cold case resolutions in Lane County. She was known, in the language of the department, for being hard to discourage. Voss pulled the original evidence log in June of 2023 and requested that all preserved biological material from the Whitfield case be submitted to the Oregon State Police Forensic Laboratory for modern analysis. This included the partial handprint from the Datsun, photographed but never fully analyzed, and a biological sample from the canvas shoe found near the South Fork. The shoe, that canvas shoe, had been in an evidence box for 43 years. It had been logged, tagged, stored at a consistent temperature in the county building on Anderson Avenue. No one had ever submitted it for biological testing because, in 1980, the technology to extract meaningful DNA from aged fabric simply did not exist. It did now. On a Thursday morning in October 2023, Voss received an email from the state forensic lab that stopped her in the middle of a cup of coffee. The shoe had yielded a biological profile, not Carol Whitfield's, someone else's. The process that followed is called investigative genetic genealogy. It works by uploading an unknown DNA profile to public ancestry databases, the same websites where ordinary people search for distant relatives and explore their family trees, and then tracing the genetic connections backward until a single individual can be identified as the source. It requires patience, careful analysis, and, in most cases, months of cross-referencing. In this case, it took 11 weeks. On December 14, 2023, Sergeant Voss sat in a conference room at the Coos County Sheriff's Office with 2 Oregon State Police analysts and a genealogist consultant from Portland. She looked at a name on a printed document, read it a second time. Then she looked up at the others in the room. "Do you know who this is?" the genealogist asked. Voss knew exactly who it was. She had driven past his property during a canvass of Beaver Hill Road. His name was in the original case file, not as a suspect. As a witness. A neighbor who had seen nothing. A man who had been helpful and cooperative and had offered her coffee. She called Diane Whitfield that evening. She could not share details, but she told her to hold on. "We have something," she said. "We have something real." His name was Dennis Roy Alderman. In December of 2023, he was 71 years old. He had lived in Coos County his entire life. The last 30 years in a ranch-style home on a property that backed up to Beaver Hill Road, less than a quarter mile from where Carol Whitfield's car had been found. He had a reputation in that community, a careful reputation built across decades. He had served 2 terms on the Coos Bay School Board. He was a deacon at his church. He coached youth baseball for 11 years. Neighbors described him as helpful, steady, that same word that people used for Carol. People said he was the kind of man you called when your truck broke down on a back road. The kind of man who showed up. Records show he had no prior criminal history, no restraining orders, no documented complaints. He was, by every visible measure, exactly what a small community wants its members to be. What investigators now began to understand was that he had been present during the original canvass in 1980. He had been interviewed briefly as a neighbor witness in February of 1981, had confirmed he heard nothing unusual the night of October 17th. and had been noted in the file as cooperative. Detective Helens had never considered him a suspect. There was no reason to. The DNA from the canvas shoe established that Alderman had been in physical contact with Carol Whitfield. Court documents confirmed that the biological material was deposited in a manner inconsistent with casual or incidental contact. Combined with the geographic evidence, his property's proximity to the scene, his presence in the area on the night in question. Investigators built a warrant application that the Coos County District Attorney described, in a later statement, as among the strongest circumstantial plus forensic packages her office had reviewed. On the morning of January 9, 2024, 4 sheriff's deputies and 2 Oregon State police officers arrived at Dennis Roy Alderman's property on Beaver Hill Road at 6:15 a.m. He answered the door in a flannel shirt. He looked at the deputies. He looked at the warrant. He did not say a word. He was placed in handcuffs on his own front porch, walked to a waiting patrol car, and driven to the Coos County Jail. By 9 a.m., the arrest had been processed. By noon, it was on the local news. By evening, it had reached national outlets. The reaction in Coos Bay was exactly what the title of this video promised. People who had sat beside him at school board meetings felt nauseated. The congregation at his church held an emergency meeting. Parents who remembered him coaching their children could not absorb what they were being told. The word that came back, again and again, from people who had known Dennis Alderman for decades, was one word: disbelief. He was charged with first-degree murder. He entered a not guilty plea at his arraignment. As of the production of this video, his case is proceeding through the Coos County Circuit Court. Carol Whitfield's remains have not been recovered. The investigation into her final hours continues. There is a photograph of Carol Whitfield that her sister Diane shared with local media after the arrest. It was taken in the summer of 1979, a year before Carol disappeared. She is standing on the tilted front porch of the greenhouse on Elrod Avenue, holding the cat named Mop against her shoulder, squinting slightly into the sun. She is smiling the way people smile when they do not know they are being photographed, not performing it, just feeling it. She was 22 years old in that photograph. She had her December trip circled in red. She had a leather planner and a grocery routine, and a sister who would spend the next 4 decades making sure the world did not forget her name. Diane Whitfield gave a brief statement to the Coos Bay World newspaper in January 2024, the week of the arrest. She said she had dreamed about this moment for 43 years. She said she had sometimes believed it would never come. She said that when Sergeant Voss called to tell her about the charges, she sat down on the kitchen floor and did not move for a long time. I just kept saying her name, Diane said. Carol, 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 like I was calling her back. That is what 44 years of love looks like when it finally has somewhere to land. The case of Carol Whitfield joins a growing list of cold cases cracked open by investigative genetic genealogy, a technology that has now resolved over 600 previously unsolvable cases across North America. Every year, it reaches further back. Every year, it pulls names from decades that seemed permanently sealed. The families who waited the longest, the ones who kept calling the sheriff's office on the anniversary, who kept a planner with red-circled dates, who said their person's name out loud to empty rooms, those families are now, in case after case, getting their phone call. Justice is not always fast. But the evidence from cases like Carol's suggests that it is, with increasing frequency, inevitable. There is a detective named Russell Helens, who is 80 years old now and still lives in Coos County. He was reached by a reporter after the arrest. He said he stood in his garage and looked at the cardboard box beside his fishing gear for a long time. Then he took the case file out and set it on the shelf. He said he felt like he could finally put it somewhere it didn't have to wait anymore. Before you go, what do you think justice looks like for a case like this, when the victim has never been found? Do you believe the community that trusted Dennis Alderman for 40 years bears any responsibility for not seeing what was there? And what does it say about how we treat missing women's cases that the first deputy Diane spoke to told her to go home and wait? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. This conversation matters. Justice found Carol Whitfield after 44 years. Stories like hers are why this channel exists. If you believe the truth is worth pursuing no matter how long it takes, subscribe so you don't miss the next case. More stories are waiting in the description below. Thank you for being here.